All good?
I think so.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming down to a slightly different venue tonight. And oh, it is on. Can you hear me? Yeah, that's better. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, so slightly different venue tonight. Thanks to those of you who came to the watch party as well. It's some really interesting announcements. Very infused with AI as we expected. But yeah, really good to watch, and it's nice to try something different, and so much for you to come as well. So thank you for coming. Yeah, so if this is the first time you've been, we're going to run through a couple of slides around who we are, the user group, and some of our kind of values and everything. So we always reiterate this. Anything that we say as part of these evenings are always our views, not a view of our employer, Microsoft. We're not affiliated with them as part of this user group. It's something that we do in our own time and everything else. So basically, don't come to us if anything breaks and we're set to deploy it.
And that also goes for our amazing speakers tonight as well, right? So any of our speakers, they are also goes for them. So we have Colin here as well, who's going to talk, who's from GitHub. So that also applies to him as well. So yeah, please do not say, well, GitHub said this or Microsoft said this. We'll deny everything. I'd also like to say a big shout out to Menzies Aviation. So Sat, who some of you have probably met in the crowd, has very kindly offered to start helping sponsoring this user group and starting putting some money towards the beers and the pizzas. So again, like massive thank you. We can't do it without sponsorship like that. For those of you who don't know, it's all been self-funded from myself and Ryan for the good majority of the time, and help from the awesome Silicon Brighton team. So you know, it really does mean a lot for people to sponsor. So if any of you are interested in sponsoring, or you've got employers that want to get themselves out in the local community a bit more, obviously we stream to YouTube, has a wider audience impact, then please do come and speak to myself and Ryan. You know, however little or however big you want to get involved, we'll be more than grateful.
So our diversity charter, so everybody's welcome to this group, regardless of background, age, race, everything. So if you feel like any of these values on the screen aren't being held tonight, just come and let one of us know, and we'll deal with it appropriately. But yeah, it's something that we always say at the beginning of every meetup. We're supported by the awesome Silicon Brighton team. They help us set up these events, market them, and everything else. So they also run a load of other user groups, technical user groups in Brighton. Some of the founders are in the room as well that run those groups. So check them out. They've got everything from .NET to AWS groups to absolutely everything. So please check out some of their meetups in the local area.
So we have gone to sort of a bi-monthly, tri-monthly sort of cadence with our meetup. So our next one is on the July the 18th. Yet to be confirmed, but you can scan the QR code and sign up now. It just says TBC. We, as always, if people from the audience want to get involved, want to get to talk, want to come and talk about something cool you're working on, something that's not working so well, you know, whatever it is, come and let us know. We do have a couple of people from external. So Jonathan has emailed us, who's some of you will know, Jonathan Diola, who wants to come and talk around private link services. So that is potentially something that I think is very interesting, very pertinent to a lot of people in the room. So that may be the topic for July the 18th, but please come and let us know if you've got any ideas. If not, we will find some more speakers.
And just to add to that, it doesn't have to be a specific technology area. It could be, I tried to do something in Azure and it didn't go right, but this is how I worked around it, or this is a project, or this was something that worked really well in Azure. We just want to hear those kind of stories from the field. So yeah, feel free to come and, you know, say if you want to do like even a 15-minute segment, we could do like a bit of an open mic night, go around the room, loads of ideas and working, but just let us know really. So this will be streamed on YouTube. If you want to look at some of our previous content, we did a bunch of podcasts through lockdown. We've been doing this for 4 years now, so we've got a load of content. Some of it's probably a little bit out of date now, some of the product stuff, but actually Margaret did our first ever podcast on Ignite, wasn't it?
It was Ignite, or it was Build.
It was Build, 2021 or something like that.
Yeah,
yeah.
Build 2021.
So yeah. Lots of content on there if you want to see some of our previous meetups and also some of our online content too. Which brings us to tonight. So we've got fabulous Matt Quinn, Margaret Orton, and Colin Bills joining us to talk about app dev, modernization, Copilot, life after lift and shift. So as you know, Jack and I kind of from the infrastructure background, we've done a lot of moves to the cloud, but actually it's not really what the cloud's built for. You know, how can you use it to its best intent? So the team are going to talk to us about this, but I'll pass over to Matt now, let him do an introduction, and enjoy the evening.
Thank you very much, both. And I've been called lots of things. Fabulous is not one of them that I get called very often, if I'm honest. So, oh, can I borrow a clicker? Yeah. Thank you very much. So look, thank you for inviting us to come and talk. I'm going to share just a few thoughts. I want this to keep this a little bit interactive. So if you've got questions, jump in, save them up at the end, shout, heckle, however you want to go. I need to have a word with our content team and Microsoft. So I'm a massive Simon Sinek fan, and everyone, well, I can see Margaret rolling her eyes because she's seen me give this talk before, but I always use, I'm going to work out which button I need to press to move forward. There we are. I always use Simon Sinek's book of Start With Why and his excellent TED Talk as a framing for almost anything that we do. Before we get into how we do something, before we get into what we do, why do we want to do it? And then Satya goes and steals it in his keynote today, but does it the wrong way around and ends with why. But he focused on why do we think about cloud? Why does Microsoft think about innovation? If I think about life after lift and shift and like app modernization, how do we change applications? How do we change the way we develop and deploy applications? I always want to start with, well, why would we do that? Why would we do things differently? Why would we change the way that we engage, the way that we develop? It's got us this far, surely it must be okay. And I'm going to go through a few ideas and build on some work and some ideas and some books that might be worth a look to help do that. I'm also conscious that I'm doing this without my speaker notes, which is a first for me because I've got a memory like a sieve. So if I get rambly, somebody wave at me or shout. So look, one of the constants in the world is change, right? From evolution, that kind of curve that Satya showed, change is the only constant, right? The world has changed at a relentless pace. Our lives change in a personal development space. Our careers change. The markets in which our companies operate change. And the ability to keep pace with that change is critical to being able to not just survive, but to thrive. So organizations that can embrace change, can capitalize on it, people who can take that change into their careers and bring that into adopting new ways of working, to getting things done differently, they will be able to thrive. The world we live in has a gazillion different types of domain and problem and technology. Some of this technology is fundamentally enabling us to deal with change. Some of it is actually causing the disruption that means we need to change. So whether it's the ability to adapt to cybersecurity, the ability to adapt to the threat landscape, the ability to change culture and what society demands of us as a business or as a public sector organization, how do we build all these things and bring them together? So what I want to talk a little bit about today, from my role as an app innovation sales manager at Microsoft, my focus is on helping customers get the most out of our technology, adopt and embrace this change, and build the systems that will enable them to do more with less, to change the way they build systems, to build systems that scale and drive efficiency into their organization. We'll hear from Margaret a little bit about what that means from a systems perspective. What kind of tools and services do we have in our kit bag that can help us get there? And Colin's going to talk a little bit about how Copilot can help us do that efficiently and effectively as we look to modernize applications. So amongst this plethora of things that we need to think about, that we might want to embrace as part of change, adopting all of those requires agility, right? New services come out every day. Like 50 announcements coming out of build today. It's going to take me weeks to get my head around all of those. But actually, how do I embrace this culture of always learning? There's always new services. There's always new products. The revenue models that exist in our organizations will change. Maybe we want to bring new products in. Maybe a competitor is disrupting us. Maybe we need to go through cost optimization because actually we need to make our business as efficient and effective as possible because we need to face new realities in our economic situation. Maybe sustainability becomes a challenge for our organization. We actually need to adopt the way that we bring our services to market to make them more carbon effective or more sustainable or better governed for a society that demands different things from our organizations, as we see with things like drives for B Corps. But to do all of these things, you need to be agile. You need to be able to change. And as the market changes, as your situation changes, you need to be able to adapt. And the quicker you can adapt, the quicker you can get out in front of that market. You can get out in front of competitors. You can disrupt your competitors rather than be disrupted by them. And I think agility is one of those things that really demarks those who will survive and thrive and those who will have to kind of dwindle and change the way that their organization works. And that is a really critical marker of success. I always refer to the work of Peter Hinson here, and he talks about agility being a company's single biggest asset. He talks about in the 20th century, size was power. Like big organizations had market dominance. They could spend money on advertising. They could buy their way into the supermarket to put a product on every shelf. They could dominate a market and they could thrive through doing that. But actually, in the modern world, the larger an organization is, the harder it is to pivot on a dime, to recognize new opportunities and change the way that your business works to capitalize on those opportunities. So he talks about building agility into your organization. And that comes at a structural level, culture being a major part of that, but equally it comes into the systems. How do we build the systems in our organization that can adapt to change, embrace it, can rapidly evolve to the changing needs that we have in our market? I'm going to pivot slightly here and talk about, Einstein talked about the strongest force in the universe being compound interest. It wasn't the strong nuclear force or gravity or electromagnetism, it's compound interest. And what he means by this is those who understand compound interest will earn it. Those who don't will pay it. And just like financial debt, if you have huge mountains of technical debt in your organization, you're paying a huge amount of resource just to stand still. If you're having to patch lots of VMs, you're having to maintain legacy code, you're having to manage systems that are very manual in their deployment cycles, actually you spend a disproportionate amount of your resource just keeping the lights on. If you can pay down some of that technical debt, you can modernize the applications that exist in your organization, you can spend a greater proportion of your investment, your time, your people, your energy on the business outcomes that you seek from the systems that you have in your organization. So the strongest force in the universe is compound interest, applies to technical debt as much as it applies to finance. So if you want to be agile, if you want your organization to be as agile as possible, what are the 3 things that I would say are takeaways for doing so? I'm going to start on the right-hand side of the slide because that's where I was with Einstein a moment ago. Reducing technical debt, making systems easier and quicker and able to pivot faster is critical to being agile. You need to balance that with control. I work in regulated industries, so financial services, manufacturing, pharma. You can't just have a Wild West where everybody turns on whatever the hell they want, right? You need some control, you need governance, you need managed processes to do that, but you can balance that with the agility that you need. And then your developers need to be productive, right? There aren't enough developers for the number of apps and the number of features and functions that organizations want to bring to market. How can we make sure that developers are focused on the tasks that add value, the human-powered innovation and interaction that they do, and remove as much of the manual scaffolding work as possible from them? Reduce the need to be continually managing pipelines and the kind of the labor-intensive work to enable developers to be focused on the creativity and solving problems that exist in the domain or the business problem that they're looking to solve. If we can unlock these 3 pillars, then we can drive agility right to the heart of our organizations. We start to get people and processes and technology in balance. That agility and control, and this particular slide comes from our cloud adoption framework. Actually, it's not just technology. It's a people challenge. It's a process challenge. It's part of the culture of your organization and how you turn every organization on the planet into a software company to build services and systems that focus on products and outcomes for your end customers. Through that journey, what we see in a lot of circumstances, particularly, and we phrase this as kind of life after lift and shift, there are a number of levels through which organizations go when they look at their systems. And on this chart, we have agility running along the bottom and technical debt or debt recovered along the vertical axis. And the aim here is along that bottom line, you've got kind of at the bottom left, you've got manual deployments, right? So we're kind of once or twice a year, we're able to get a new set of features into live. This is the old Microsoft world. We used to release Office every 3 years and there'd be a patch every 6 months. And that kind of cadence existed for the product to evolve. Seasonal releases, manual high touch maintenance that typically might need a weekend where people are downing servers and bringing things back up and a change window when you're having to do releases. And on the right-hand side, you've got highly agile systems, highly autonomous, low manual touch deployments, things that are very automated. The manual and repetitive tasks have been removed. The non-value adding tasks are removed, so developers can focus on value. On the vertical axis, you've got debt recovered. At the bottom end of this, you're paying interest. You're just keeping the lights on, lots of energy just to keep things going. And at the top, you've got a higher proportion of your resource investing in the outcomes that the business needs from those systems. So when we start with this, like the world as of 10, 15 years ago, everything was on premise, right? We owned the hardware, we managed the full stack, maybe we outsourced bits of that problem to a colo or a vendor, but effectively we managed top to bottom that whole stack. And we'll have all seen the pizza box slide for kind of on-prem, IaaS, PaaS, SaaS. But effectively, as we move up that stack, we've got IaaS, or infrastructure as a service. Effectively, then the vendor, the cloud provider, is providing the hardware and the physical infrastructure, the environment into which it works, the deployment and the management services that surround that. but you still have to manage and patch the operating system. Any middleware and applications, anything that you want to back up, any dependencies you want to deploy, you're still managing the infrastructure to make that work. As you move up further, there's potentially container platforms. So actually now I've got my container, my application is packaged up, ready for deployment, but I've got an orchestrator that's coordinating, making sure I've got that running for me. I've got that kind of running in production. We move further up the stack, we have platform as a service. Bring my code, configure what services it needs from the underlying platform, and then push that to the platform and make it the platform's problem to keep my application up with the interfaces it needs, the connectivity that it needs, and the services it needs to run my application. And at the top end of that, you've got software as a service. That might include low code, so Power Apps kind of platforms or build configuration type tools, where you're composing applications rather than necessarily developing them. You're taking data, you're building workflows, you're building connectors that surface the functionality you need. With each of these layers, you're concerned with less and less of the underlying details of how the system works, and you'll focus more on why your system exists and the value that it seeks to deliver. And we often see in a kind of app innovation world, 7 Rs, and I've seen 5 Rs, 6 Rs, a whole different number of Rs, depending on whose advisories you read, that effectively give us the opportunity here. So retain is the first one, right? Some things will still live on premise. Some things may fit on premise. There may be a governance reason that you need to do that. Some things you might rehost, lift and shift. We'll take that and we'll make it run in the cloud. You could re-architect these applications, maybe tweak the way that they work and change the way that they're architected, decompose them in some way, and re-platform them to a container architecture, or maybe move them to a PaaS service. You might refactor them completely. You might change a large portion of your application to take advantage of platform as a service to remove some of the technical debt of managing the underlying infrastructure behind your application. You might choose to rewrite an application. Maybe it's legacy, maybe some of the functionality is not required by the business anymore because it was written in the 90s. Actually, how do we reinvent that application? And if we're going to reinvent that, do we need to do that wall to wall in pro code? Could we do some of that as low code? Could we have citizen developed apps working in partnership with professionally developed APIs and back-end systems? So we're each playing to our strengths. As a developer, I didn't particularly like having to deal with style sheets and make sure the buttons were in the right order and the things were in the right front end. I liked solving the kind of meat of the business problem. So the opportunity to bridge that gap and enable business analysts, kind of technical dangerous people who would typically build maybe an Excel model, enable them to build the front end, build the logic of the application, and interact with professionally developed APIs and services behind the scenes to scale the impact of our development and enable a broader community of people to engage in the process of building apps. And then ultimately, you might have replace, right? Do I need a bespoke application? Could I buy a SaaS service off the shelf? Could I buy something that's already designed to run in a container or runs as a PaaS service? Or in the slightly grayed out one at the left-hand side, retire. Maybe this application is just not needed anymore. Could we turn it off? So all of these 7 Rs are components of a journey to agility. How do we simplify the operating of our systems? And it's not just simplifying the technology. The total cost comes from how we operate it, how we manage it, how we keep it in production. And I'm going to hand the mic to Margaret at this point on the basis that all of these are underpinned by services that she understands far better than I do.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's zoom in into the right-hand side of this slide and look at the services that you might want to consider when you're modernizing your applications. I work with financial services customers at Microsoft, and quite often we have conversations around what service, what target platform should be considered for my application. And the answer is always, well, it depends. So the options you have there, they span from control to productivity. So if you want more control, you might want to consider container platforms. If you want more productivity, then we advise customers to look into a low-code solution or serverless. Containers are quite popular these days, and they certainly solve this "it works on my machine" problem. So if you have loads of applications and perhaps you host them one-to-one on a VM, and those VMs are typically not utilized really well, if you package those applications into containers, you can host the same amount of applications on fewer virtual nodes. If you're looking into refactoring and re-architecting your application, and you're looking into microservices architecture, well, containers is a good fit as well, because Containers could be developed, tested, and deployed independently, that you scale them independently. And then, of course, you will need probably an orchestration platform, and Kubernetes is a popular one. And Azure Kubernetes Service takes care of some of the complexities of Kubernetes. However, there is still a lot you need to do by yourself. So having that operational model around Kubernetes is really important if you're adopting container platforms. So you'll still need to worry about how you monitor things, about networking, firewalls, all of these things. If you like containers, but not so keen on managing Kubernetes, well, there is an option for you there to look at Azure Container Apps. Azure Container Apps are built on top of Kubernetes, but all the complexities of Kubernetes are removed from you. So you can only focus on your containers, on your code, and you can use Dapper. It's very well integrated into Azure Container Apps, so you can use that for service invocation. And container apps are using CADA for scalability as well. If you have applications that you quite want to move up the stack, but not so keen on making loads of changes because it might be risky or it just takes time, we advise you to look into Azure App Service, and that one deserves its own slide. So Azure App Service is our PaaS offering. It offers high productivity for developers and operations. It is fully managed platform, and it is enterprise grade. So you can deploy an application, you can deploy code as is. It supports multiple different frameworks. You can deploy .NET applications, you can deploy Node, Java applications. If your application has dependencies, you can package your application into a container and deploy a container to App Service. It supports Windows and Linux containers. My favorite feature of App Service, and when I first used App Service in my previous life, that was completely amazing, the deployment slots. So if you make a change to your application, you deploy it into your deployment slot, you can put like 10% of the traffic into that, check that everything works, and then swap and make a new change to be a production slot, and the old one goes into the staging. And then if something goes wrong, which sometimes it does, you can switch it all back. Great. So fully managed platform, auto scaling is there all for you. So if your application experiences big load, then it will scale. It will scale out for you. You can also scale up if you feel like you need a bit more CPU and memory for your application. The integration with Azure Active Directory is really handy. Just a toggle, you can switch, and then your application will be secured. Right, let's go back to this slide. And imagine you have an application that you deploy to App Service. So now you're on PaaS, you're up the stack, you don't manage VMs, great. Now you need to make change to this application. Maybe you need to develop new functionality. So your options are, well, you can add it to the existing application, but then of course you have to change the existing application. You have to test the whole thing. It takes time. What you can do here, you can put new functionality into Azure Function. And this is a good approach that we see customers do. And then you can not just develop new functionality on the Azure Functions, you can start extracting existing functionality from the existing monolith and sort of using this triangle approach, moving your existing monolithic application into more modern, maybe event-driven cloud-native application. So Azure Functions are our serverless compute. They are integrating really well with our CI/CD tools. There is monitoring there. You can plug in application insights. You can debug them and develop locally. Great. So when do you want to use them? When you want to build an API, maybe you want to use a function to respond to a change in the database. It's great if you want to use, I don't know, to manage message queues, or something appears in a storage account and you need to write some logic to react to that. Azure Functions have these two things that are really great, triggers and bindings. So how do you trigger the function? This is literally just one line of code in the signature of the function. You specify, do you want to trigger it on the on HTTP trigger, or maybe it is on a timer, or perhaps a new message arrives to the queue, so you want to execute the logic. So all that plumbing that you typically would need to write with Azure Functions is just one line of code in the signature, write as a trigger, and focus on your logic. Binding is the concept if your function needs to interact with a database or storage account. So again, one line of code and a signature, and all the plumbing is done for you. So great productivity services you can see. And on the right-hand side here, we have logic apps. So logic apps are great for workflow orchestrations. We have over 400 connectors there, I think. You can write your own custom connectors. And this is our low-code offering, drag and drop. You can create really complex workflows with logic apps. So definitely worth having a look if you are looking into productivity and writing something really quite clear. And talking of productivity, if you are modernizing your applications, you're writing applications, you're writing code, and when you're doing so, you want to be as productive as possible. So I'll hand over to Colin to talk about GitHub Copilot.
So I'm going to need somewhere to set this laptop. Thank you very much.
All right.
Yeah. Did you have the locale?
We can. Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm never going to be able to type.
enough hands, Colin.
No. Well, that somehow came undone. Okay, right. Well, where was I? So we're moving faster, but developers are saying they're more fulfilled with what they're doing using Copilot, and I think this comes back to what Matt was saying previously around developers want to spend their time being creative and not building scaffold code that they've built a million times before. We've all only got so many key presses in our lifetime, so doing less is more. And we're seeing when you're actually using Copilot that when we look and analyze the files, that like 46% is actually written by the Copilot itself rather than necessarily the developer. Probably worth saying, the developer has had eyes on everything. So we are generating our code suggestions from models that we're learning off of open source code, never private code, unless you elect to put code into a public space or tell us that you would like us to learn from your code. We will never learn from your code itself. So that means that if we're learning and ingesting from public code, that code could be good or it could be bad. So it still needs to go through all of the same engineering systems that you're used to day in, day out in terms of your CI, CD, security scanning, linters, all of those sorts of processes, because the code that you might have might not be the best code out there, but hopefully it fulfills that. And we do see actually that quality is pretty good for the code that's being created. We work from any of these IDEs, so Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, NeoVim, and any of the JetBrains IDEs. So there are plugins into the IDE that once enabled, enable you to start developing, and we'll come back with a suggestion based off of what you're creating. To kind of go through that, I will demo. The only thing I do want to mention as well here is we will support any language out there. So, you know, if you're doing kind of C#, Python, no problems. But equally, if you're doing something like infrastructure as code, so if you're sat here today saying, you know, I come along to an Azure user group, but I don't necessarily develop applications day in, day out, you're still probably writing things like Bicep or ARM or Terraform or something like that. And so this is equally applicable in those scenarios where you can start to use the Copilot to help you in those sorts of code files in infrastructure as code. The only other bit that I will just make sure I dwell on one more time is once that context arrives to OpenAI, unless you tell us otherwise, we will never learn from that. And in fact, our Copilot for Business offering, so if you buy it through your work, we will never, ever learn from that. You can't even elect for us to start learning from that context in any way, shape, or form. So let's sort of do some demos and put some stuff. And you may well have seen Copilot, but hopefully I can give you some degree of understanding if you've not seen like kind of how it kind of functions a little bit. So I'm going to start with the most trivial of examples to kind of go through. Let's go into here. Oops, not there. So let's start with a little JavaScript application, most trivial of examples to start thinking about, you know, I'm doing something like adding two numbers together. And you know, you'll see these sorts of examples where you might sort of say get and then be like add two numbers. Well, that's kind of what I wanted, but I want to say and return a result. So you'll see as I'm typing, it's already sort of thinking about things that it could complete with. And as we go through, now it can give me some suggestions around this. And this is the most kind of trivial of examples that we kind of have out there. And of course, if I then went on to the next bit of code, it'll actually then start saying, well, maybe the next thing you want to do is actually subtract two numbers. So we can kind of go subtract, and it goes through the same process, you know, sort of going through there as we go. Now, the reason why I kind of start with this very trivial example is if I take this kind of out of here and I were to change this code subtly and say, add two numbers and return the result. So I've now changed the context that my environment is in. And so we're not doing, if I look to get suggestions again, we won't get most probably something that looks like we did the first time. What we'll get is something that matches the code and the context that we're in. So this isn't just copy paste from, there's an add method out there on the internet that we're grabbing from Stack Overflow and pasting into your editor. This is generative AI that's working off of the context of the files that you're within, so that we can actually provide you with a suggestion of what to do within the Copilot. Of course, there's me working kind of there. Equally, if I were to go to the next bit, it's going, do you want to multiply? If I hit Control Enter there, it'll actually synthesize potentially different solutions there. So here you can see, well, I don't want to go by it one by one. I want multiply and divide, and I can accept that solution or go through the numerous solutions that it might well provide to me out here. So you can kind of then see that there's modulus and all sorts of other suggestions that we could accept and bring into our code file there. Of course, I mentioned it works on many different languages. So here's it, let's say, in a Python file. And here I've got a Python API that's got a get method. You can see there's a post method here, and there's a delete method. So I don't have an update currently, and so I want to go and put one in. So I'm going to go in and tell this that we want to update an order. And you can see straight away it's saying, oh, well, you probably want this one with a put verb in here, and it's going to be called update order, and that's sort of all looking good in sort of the world. And actually at this point in time, it's going to give me a whole load of text that pretty much finishes exactly what I want to do. So it's now going and using the context of the other pieces in here. And the reason why I wanted to kind of flag this example is you can see here it's generated quite a lot of code. And actually, when I say quite a lot, I'm meaning to a limit of 150 characters. And we start to treat things a little bit differently, where we see suggestions of 150 characters or more, because some organizations and individuals are more sensitive to the fact that I don't want to be copying code that's out there. If this matches something that's already out there in the public domain, I'm a little bit more sensitive to that. And so either I might well not want to even allow my developers to see this suggestion, which clearly wasn't the case for me. It actually gave me the suggestion. Or I'm going to flag here in this code quote kind of code match piece that actually we've seen this code before, and this is where it belongs, or this is where it came from, or not came from, this is where we've seen it before. So it's generated something that is also then the same as something that's out there. And actually the reason for this is this update order largely is exactly the same as this, sorry, it'll be the save order that we've got in here. So the post order. So the code is kind of the same. So it's generated it using the context of my own editor in this instance, but the stuff that's in my editor is just an example that I forked out of GitHub anyway. So it's sort of noticed this this is the same as this other thing. And the great thing about this is I can see where that came from, the license that that's under, and now I can make an informed decision as to whether I want to work with that or not. Obviously, this has been sort of in market for a while. We've had this kind of in place, but we are looking now to broaden where we're taking Copilot. And so I'm just sort of going to go and flip to something that we've not got actually out there in market at the moment, but we've got in beta, and you're able to come and sign up for the beta. This is a bunch of technologies that we're labeling under Copilot X. And Copilot X includes things like Copilot chat. And so we can go into Copilot chat and start asking questions, a bit more like ChatGPT, and what you may well have seen there. So I might say something like, I don't know, what web frameworks for Node are there? Something like that. And so it's going to tell me, oh, there's quite a few. These are popular. There's Express, all of these sorts of things. So maybe I'll say scaffold me an Express application. Oops. And then it'll tell me what I need to do. So it's going, you need to, do npm install Express, and then you've got a bunch of code here that you can then insert into your code base. So you might do insert a new file. I probably want to grab this and go and check it in the terminal, but you get the idea that we've got kind of some code there that starts to do what we might well want. And of course, we might well change this, something like change hello world to hello Sussex Azure user group. And then it will kind of come back again with a suggestion, and it will change kind of the context that we're in. So we're kind of working around that sort of a piece that we might well want to go through. I kind of mentioned that this works on any language, and again, cognizant of the fact that we are in a Azure thing. So maybe we want to say, write a bicep file to create a, I don't know, web app. Sorry? No thanks. Loop 100 VNets. I don't think so. But here you go. You can see it's kind of generated me the web app. It's got the app service plan. It's got a web app. And yeah, you might well then go on and say, change location to UK South or something like that, and keep going through this. So you can see sort of where we're going with these sort of chat functionality. The key bit being that actually you can then just insert this kind of really easily into the editor. It kind of works on it nicely within the IDE. Other experiences that we're going through with Copilot X, we're also kind of doing some stuff around documentation. So we're looking to ingest documentation from sources that you might well have. So it might be something like the GitHub documentation. Let's take the Azure Docs, something like that. And maybe we want to ask it to do something here. What did you want us to do? 100 VNet in bicep. Okay. Let's see how it goes. And I'm going to need Jack to tell me whether this is actually any use or not in this.
I probably wouldn't handle it in that way, but that will work because you now need to create an array with 100 bits.
Okay.
That's quite lengthy. I'd probably do it a different way, but that will work.
So what would you follow it up with in terms of your alternate approach? See if we can get it to change based on the prompt.
Can we shorten the input parameter?
This might not work, but it's kind of it's sort of the examples there. He's not impressed.
It's got bicep wrong now. the metadata and bits of like the actual array at the top, the param VNets array, that's generally fine, but that metadata object is not valid bicep.
Got you.
So,
okay.
But the rest of it's fine. Hey, but that I think that's reality, right? Like that's what I use it for. Like I'll go on, give me some ideas because I'm literally scratching my head here. So it's like I use it as a rubber duck. That's how I use Copilot. Sometimes it nails it, and I have to change 5%. Sometimes it doesn't, but it's given me an idea to get me to do the 90%, and then ask it a more sensible question.
There we go.
Can you feed it the boilerplate code, or does it just go and look for it itself?
So,
can you feed it the sort of boilerplate code from examples that you already have, or will it just go and find its own?
So this is ingesting it very specifically from, let's say, the Azure documentation. So it's going and learning from the Azure docs that are out there so that it can generate these suggestions based off of the back of that. So I guess in the fullness of time, kind of you'll see many scenarios, like the technologies that are being announced today and the ones that are already in market with kind of OpenAI, where you might well already go and point it at your own data sets to go and learn and start to think about that. we're starting just to apply this to key sort of development documentation in this. The only other bits, I'll not do a kind of a demo on this one. We're also bringing this to the CLI as well. So you'll be able to go into the CLI, start typing things like, well, we haven't done Azure yet, but we can, let's say it was like the Git CLI. You'd do something like Git ? How do I roll back the last 2 commits or something, and it will come back and give you a suggestion right there in the CLI, because nobody ever remembers CLI commands. So that's pretty useful stuff. And the other areas that we're looking at this to come out sort of next will be around pull requests. So the pull request process, we know what your code's doing. You've got your commits that are as part of that pull request. We can start to understand what that is. So actually, all of that text that you normally have to go through to actually write out your pull request and say, I'm looking to do this in the pull request, we can just automate that for you and just say, this is what the pull request does. You can read the text and go, yeah, that kind of was what I meant. We can even look at the code that's part of that and say, and you're missing some tests as well. Do you want us to generate some tests for you too? Yeah, we're looking at that sort of area. So these are all in beta, these areas. So feel free to go and try those. And actually today I found out about this new little area for Copilot itself on resources.github.com/copilot-demo. You literally can create a code space with Copilot enabled directly on it. So you can go and try out some scenarios and just go play with this stuff without setting up anything on your own machine. There's a code space, so a sort of a virtual environment in the cloud that you can start working with that'll spin up within seconds. So that's on resources.github.com /Copilot demo.
One question, Colin. Copilot chat. Am I right in thinking, I've been playing with it, it can also explain code? So that's like a really useful feature where I am no Go developer, but I understand enough of it to read it. But sometimes I look at it and it's just like words. So can you highlight it? You can highlight code, right?
You can highlight code and say, explain to me what this code does. You can do other things like say, can you generate me some tests for this code? You can do stuff like say, can you find the bug in this code? And it will look for bugs and suggest fixes. And the other way that we're doing as well is around security. So can you make this code more robust? So you're starting to see, in fact, we're thinking about how we bind that into our advanced security product as well within GitHub. So we're looking at putting AI everywhere in terms of the different feature areas of the product that you could use that within.
Awesome. Well, the explain code feature, I think, is amazing for organizations that are developing apps, and quite common they'll have high turnover because of organizational process and challenges, and it might not go that quickly. But having a tool like that, I think, would massively help. I don't know what you think on that one, Matt.
I guess one of the bits we were talking about, modernizing legacy applications. Often you're doing that, 20 years after the dev who built it left the organization. So the ability to very quickly get up to speed with what actually is this piece of code doing? What's the network effect that this piece of code is going to have? How do I look at refactoring it without breaking the whole damn thing? Or how do I convert it from language A to language B? Those kind of things for rewriting and getting those modernizations up and running fast is really, really powerful. Because ultimately, if you're rewriting an application, like the business value isn't going to massively change in the short term, right? It does the same thing it did before, just differently. So the quicker you can get that done, the better that outcome is going to be. So if Copilot's helping you speed that process up, that's awesome.
So you see that we have kind of even today without Copilot X, there's an add-in to Visual Studio Code called Copilot Labs. So it's got some of these explain features, language translation. So you can say, this is in Python, can you give it me in C#? Can you do test generation? Can you fix bug? Can you make it more readable? All of these sorts of areas we're already invested in. You can go download Copilot Labs as an add-in to VS Code and start playing with this stuff already. With that.
Awesome.
Good round of applause. is there any questions for any of the speakers before we close off and wrap up with some socializing and some more drinks? Are our jobs safe as developers?
Okay, right. So we see this quite a lot, and I really think that this is just the evolution of our industry. So you think about, kind of when was the last time you wrote like machine code or assembly language? Like we turned into sort of, we make use of tools through a compiler to make it a higher level language. We're just going the next step, right? Our jobs have always been about decomposing problems into something and then going through that decomposition process. This is just the same. Yes, we will, like these stats of making you 55% more efficient, producing 46% of code are true today, and they'll get better. But actually, still the fundamentals of decomposing your requirements into kind of smaller areas that actually we can then turn into actual code, I think still is going to be around for some time. You still have to go through the process of, I know what that code does. It does the right thing. It's doing it in the most performant way, or a performant way that will work for my business. All of those sorts of things are still going to be the case. I truly don't think we'll be out of jobs anytime soon.
And I think to add on to that, you look at where we did that bicep example, it didn't get it right? So it gave you an idea, but you're now going to need to work with it and prompt further and, do some troubleshooting yourself. You're still going to have to understand what it's doing. So yeah, I don't think anybody's jobs are unsafe for a little while. They certainly, it will make us faster, if anything. It will let us do the more interesting things, as Matt said, like building more professional applications and helping us, not do the scaffolding and, make that button be in the center and, make sure it, when I hover over it, does X, Y, and Z. Like, nobody cares about that stuff. Like, that stuff is easy. Ask it to do it, trust it, test it, happy days.
Yeah, because we already use Google a lot while we're coding, so it's like a supercharged version, hopefully.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's one to jump in there. I think like Satya used the phrase in the keynote, flow. Like, how do I stay in my flow? If I'm writing code and I'm having to go off and search and I'm in my browser and I get distracted because I've got ads or emails, like and I'm out of my zone. The aim with this is to keep that really in the flow. So I'm actually staying in that, it's suggesting it in context. And context is the other key component there, right? So as Colin did with the post method and the put method, it's aware of the context of what I'm writing. So you could go off to ChatGPT and say, write me a function that does X or Y, but it's not aware of the context in which you're doing that.
Yep.
When you do this embedded in your IDE, it's suddenly looking at the other code in the rest of this and going, oh, actually, what I think you're trying to do here is, and you've got a structure that you've used for this other code, I'll emulate that structure when I write the put method, just like the post method. And that context is just means it's that much sharp and gets there really quickly. Sorry, I heard Colin say that before, and I've just stolen his words.
Well, fantastic. Yeah, another round of applause for the instance. That was really, really good. I think just takeaways, that's just kind of blown my mind in terms of as a non-developer, what you could do. And I kind of feel empowered that I could just spin out a bicep file and do something with that. But I think, like word of the day is probably Copilot. All of the things that we've seen in the keynote, Colin's demo and everything that we've spoken about, it's really incredible time where we're seeing everything get AI infused and actually just enable productivity through Windows, through GitHub, through everything. It's interesting to see. But yeah, thank you for coming. As Jack said, we've got our next meetup in July, 18th of July. And yeah, please just let us know if you want to see any particular content. We can go after different speakers for certain areas. But thank you for coming. Stay, network, socialize, more drinks. Anything you want to add?
No, all good. Thank you again.
Oh, quick plug. Jack's actually presenting at Build at 10:30 tonight. So the stuff. Yeah, if you want to watch him on the build screens, and which event is it?
So we're doing a what's next for Azure landing zone. So obviously most of you know that I look after Azure landing zones. So yeah, 10:30 till 11:30. Session PRT 007. Still probably time to sign up if you do it in the next hour. But yeah, so yeah, you can come along and talk to us and ask us what's next and what you'd like to see, and obviously we'll share a little bit into the future of what we're doing there. But yeah, pop along. But yeah, again, thank you for our amazing speakers. Like, absolutely awesome session. And yeah, please do keep socializing and finish the drinks, and yeah, enjoy. Thanks all.